This video is an overview of how to navigate the NWACC Library's homepage website. In the very top corner when you enter the page, you'll see that our calendar. If you click Full Calendar, you could expand to see all of our hours for the different centers that are open, including the online library hours, the Information Commons, and Washington County Commons. Ask Us is a little pop-up that will usually open itself within about 15 seconds, but you can also expand it yourself. This is embedded on most pages on the library website. This will connect you to a real-life librarian or staff member. It is not a computer. You're really connecting to a real person with your question. Just put in your information and we'll get your chat and get back to you. This banner at the top has important information for what's currently happening with the library. If something is here, it's important to check that out. In this case, it has our return to operations guide and our contact information. Search Everything is a very large search tool that searches about 70% of our databases and collections, so you can look at everything in one place. On the side, you'll see a couple of different categories. Books and Media searches the library catalog. Research Databases bring you to the different databases we have that you can use for your assignments. You can look at journals directly. You could get an interlibrary loan. The research guides are designed for subject areas and for specific classes. So if you need help, for example, with a sociology class or a composition class, you should find your research guide located under this tool. We also have a space for citation help if you need citation, as well as lists for other services for students. As you scroll down, you'll also see that there is a place to make an appointment with a librarian. You can make both a video appointment or an in-person appointment to meet with us online for help with your work. The banners on the page, such as Grab and Go, advertise relevant services and things that we have going on at the moment. This page is your #1 stop for finding help on your assignments or getting in touch with us. If you have any trouble navigating this page, always click this Ask Us and we will help you at that time.